You're listening to The Breakup Theory, conversations about ending things and collective liberation.
The Breakup Theory is launching a new project where we ask you, our listeners, to share your stories of breaking up, conflict with friends and lovers and family, and any other relationship trouble that you'd like feedback on. One of the main ideas of this podcast was to try to create a space where queers and anarchists and abolitionists can talk about how their politics and their personal lives entwine. We set up an online submission form at forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories and a phone line at 917-426-6548. You can call in, write in, and share your story. We'll keep the submissions anonymous and won't share any information that you don't want us to. Caroline, River, and I will then take the story and read it on the podcast and share a discussion about the issues that you raise. We're excited to hear what's going on in your world and help you all break up what's keeping you down. On today's episode, I talk with the wonderful Carla Joy Bergman. Carla is a transdisciplinary artist and collaborates with humans and more than human friends. She co-wrote Joyful Militancy and edited Trust Kids. She also made the podcast Grounded Futures with her son Uilliam, as well as the On Belonging audio series with Jamie-leigh Gonzalez. Our conversation ranges through the beginning and ending of groups and projects, the necessity of intergenerational organizing, the joys and pains of breaking up with family and loved ones, how we create space together, and the relationship between anarchism, nihilism, and the leftist movements. To check out more of Carla's work, you can go to their website, joyfulcarla.com. Carla also has a new podcast project about to launch, which you can find at walkingwithchange.captivate.fm. I'll put all these links in the show notes too. Hope you enjoy the talk. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today. I thought one way we could start the conversation is like maybe a sort of simple sounding question, but could open up into different places. But I'm wondering about your own sort of experiences of breaking up and how that's been able to give you a sense of liberation, whether that's like in a personal, like one-on-one relationship or within organizing or projects. Because I know you've also like done a lot of different projects that have their own time span.
Yeah, great. I love this show. Thanks for having me here. I really I have a lot of joy in quitting. And I find a lot of joy in ending. A mentor, when I was like 20 told me that my special gift is I know when to leave. I know when to end things. And I remember that landed on me a little hard at the time, but she definitely watered a seed about trusting that intuition of when to leave. And I'm really interested in leaving well. And I would say it's part of my like artistic practice is like how to end things well and bust through the binaries of like what is good, of doing and leaving or breaking up or loving or whatever. But yeah, like I also broke up with my whole first family or whatever you call it, the family I was born into. Like I broke up with the whole family, like cut them out entirely. So that is like a massive breakup and one that was not easy and brings me a lot of grief to this day. Doing the audio show On Belonging, it just churned it all up because one of the things that came up on all the episodes is that I think almost everyone that spoke had a real deep connection to family.
Right.
And I was like, I just saw the stark difference of like, right. I mean, I created a family with my partner and I have two amazing kids and I cultivate kin beyond even humans. But when you think about, relatives, I like the difference between blood relatives and family or making kin. And like, I have none outside of them. And I was like, oh man. So that's probably like the hardest breakup.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of what you said I want to pull out, but maybe just starting there, because that's one of the things a lot of people have to navigate in their life, because whatever your, family of origin is for queer people, for anarchists or leftists or whatever, there's often like breaking points there. And I've seen a lot of people struggle with the sense of obligation to like parents and feeling like actively harmed by their relationship with parents or siblings, and not being able to cut it off because of that sense of obligation. And I actually think that there's maybe something similar too to the way that we get involved in projects, thinking that like we need to be part of something or else we're not doing the right work or the work that's expected of us. Yeah, so I just want to say, like, I know that must be a hard thing to deal with, especially since so many people just take it for granted that that's a connection that you keep. Thinking about knowing when it's the right time, I mean, and also I guess in your attempts to create new ways of relating that are not those harmful ones, how does that sort of breakup inform the way that you go into relationship?
Oh, great question. Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that I have no judgment for people who stick it out with the
Right.
challenging relatives, and particularly the dynamic of parents and siblings. Mine had everything to do with the safety of my children. So, I had a really strong reason to leave.
Yeah, sometimes it's stark and you're like, I know I need to do
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. So everyone out there who, keeps some kind of connection, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, there was a project in Seattle, just outskirts of Seattle, and their sign, like it was like a land project, and it said arrive and leave well. And it impacted me so powerfully, like years ago. And so what I said earlier is I try to leave well. I also try to arrive well, open, curious, leave all my answers at the door.
Yeah.
But I'm also someone who, like, I'm pretty much a deep professional in that I don't have a lot of credentials, or I'm not an expert in anything. So I often have to create things for myself. There's a way that I'm, especially in the last 20 years, where I'm at the forefront of whatever, or at the center of the nucleus of something starting. So that's an interesting,
Yeah.
like if I really think about it, I'm like, I think everything I've done in the last 20 years, I've generated with a group of friends. So
Yeah.
that's a different than just showing up. I mean, I guess it's showing up at some, organizing, like for a specific reason, like whether it's for unhoused folks in town or something, like where there's more of an affinity groups coming together, like those places, I guess. But those are usually just small. They don't last. So I don't know.
Well, it's so hard when you realize that you're like involved in all these things that are sort of dependent on your ability to keep them running. Thinking about illness, for example, as like a chronically ill person, when I'm like pulled out of my work, I have anxiety because I'm like everything's going to crash down around me because I'm like spinning plates, like multiple plates at a time, and I can't stop spinning them or everything will break. And I think that's also just like a tendency that a lot of people have in their work. It's maybe partially like connected to the sort of emphasis on individualism and the difficulty to collaborate with people. So yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but also I wanted to pull on this other thing that you were talking about in terms of like coming into spaces, because this is something I also see in organizing space, where like coming in with like open ideas without like all the solutions ready isn't how most people enter spaces where they're trying to do projects, right? And people don't have a lot of room for nuance, for just actual discussion of difficult things, because they want to just like get things done. And maybe there's a connection between those two things, because maybe the person who's open is able to like hold that like space in the middle that things can revolve around. But yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on those two aspects of like organizing.
Yeah, I think they're tremendously connected. Yeah, I personally I think that the thing that's running through since we started this conversation a few minutes ago is that I think a lot of us, because of trauma, because of childhood stuff, we really want a better world. We want to create a better world. So this is why we care about justice, and we care about liberation and freedom and autonomy. And we also fear abandonment and judgment, right? So you put those two things together, and that can, like, they compose a certain kind of way of being in the world, whether it's like always showing up even when you're really ill. I do that, you do that, I know, because there's like a fear of abandonment. Like I know for me, that I can't speak for everybody, sorry, lost me, but I do know, like when I talk to my friends who do different types of healing work, they say this is like this, when they get to the root with their clients, this is always the issue. Like a fear of abandonment, like on a deep level, like abandoning yourself, abandoning your ethos, abandoning your ethics, being abandoned by other people. So I think, like, when you come into a space with that kind of composition, like especially if fear is being animated within you, it's going to be harder to be open or to be able to adjust to the parameters that are there, or maybe the stronger personality that's in the room or whatever. And I think that they really go together. I think that it's not by surprise that I create a lot of the things I do, because while I do hold that space and show up well for certain things at certain times in my life, and I do love to collaborate, I'm not always up for sharing space with people whose favorite thing to say is, no one has ever done this before, or my other least favorite thing, if that's already been done. So against experimentation, and thinks is quite hubris about their position. So I tend to have not a ton of hospitality for that type of energy. And so I think also those are my growth edges, or whatever you want to call them. But I think it's okay to be aware of who you are. And, I'm 57. So at this point in my life, I have a stronger awareness about where I'm willing to compromise, where I'm willing to, I don't know, not get burnt out, not feel hurt, and to actually show up with an incredible amount of love and care for everyone in the room. And I think that's okay too. I think we try to replicate that, everything has to happen at once and everyone has to be included. I think I'm kind of all over the place. I'm doing the thing I do, composing a wild experimental band with thoughts.
No, yeah, we'll put it all together.
Thank you.
No, I'm thinking this way too for some reason, because getting into this, I find everything to be connected. And so this is something I've thought about and written before. Anarchism for me, it helped me be more explicit in my relationships with people and in the kind of whatever organizing grassroots DIY work that I do, because I felt like anarchists are more willing to acknowledge the limitations of people have. And when you say them, when you and say, hey, I can't do this because I don't have capacity for whatever reason, if you give a reason, that they can hear it more often, because it's something that I think anarchism brings us to, practicing those boundaries and practicing the kind of containment of time. And then, this thing always comes up and always happens over and over again, these problems I find. And this is making me think too about one of the reasons why family breakups are important, is because you get put into the same narrative over and over again by a family structure that's very hard to escape, and that pulls you back in. And whenever I have had the impulse or needed to take a break from my family, it's because I'm I don't want to play this role over and over again. And there's maybe there's something in the ways that we come together to do things together, where there's sort of these positions that produce, through their position, no matter who's involved in it, we get to these same kinds of problems and questions, where it's expectations to overinvest your energy and time to the point of harming yourself, inability to be clear on what you're trying to get out of a project when it's not working, basically, and when it is working. And this is something I'm sort of currently struggling with too, just because we're in this moment of watching a genocide happen and trying desperately to do anything that feels like it's going to help from over, across the world. And, we're up against that typical sort of wall that's the state that just that's not actually there to listen to us. And so I'm having these discussions over and over again with people about what to do and how to do it, and who's doing what and what's enough, and who's really doing work and who's not doing work. Again, maybe trying to boil it down to a specific question, going back to what you started with, how do you know when something is done?
Oh yeah, there's so much there I mean, I have a really strong intuition, and I just really trust it. And, my body literally will be the first to say, no, enough. Ya basta, it will just be no, it just shuts down. My blood pressure drops. I can't get out of bed if I don't listen to those early signs. And I feel like I have to push through. I always think of Scott Crow has that thing. It's really funny. It's not everything's a fucking emergency. Right now we're in a bit of, we're in a heightened emergency moment. And then I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's interesting to me. And when we're face to face with each other in an actual emergency, do you notice how these issues don't come up very often? We actually just show up really well, and people just do their thing, and we take care of each other, and mutual aid flows with no problems overall. Not going for perfection here, but it's interesting that when we're in a kind of quote unquote non-emergency, I would say we're all in, it's always a crisis, but
right.
there's a difference, right? There's subtleties.
For
Like
sure.
a lot of the work I do, it's around art and activism and that, and blurring the lines between art and life and having a good, autonomous, thriving life in the moment, and working with young people in particular around that. That is not an emergency, that work, right? You know, I was part of the Institute for Anarchist Society, Studies. I was on the board, and I often would bring that up. Like, we do really important work. We support publishing, but it's not a fucking emergency. Like, we can spend time on our relationships. We can spend time when we have some conflict as a group. And I think that not everyone can show up that way on a collective. I think that they think it's all an emergency. And so that's where a lot of the tension happens. So often, if that's kind of the, so I didn't even answer your question. So basically, I trust my intuition. I believe that most projects have a lifetime. There's been a lot of research on this that they tend to last about 15 years. And when they go beyond that, they usually transmute into an institution, or they start to become a larger arm of the state. Like, I can't recall who did the deep dive research of this, but but I was curious because the Thistle closed after 15 years, and then another project down in Oaxaca closed after 15 years that was similar, and I was like, interesting.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I think also that fear of failure, you know, so-called failure, you know, who's the writer? Beckett? Fail better. We need to just fail better. And so I just really try to embrace that idea of like failing better. I also want to say that I'm not particularly good at all this with one-on-one friendships. Like, I have a really hard time if a friendship gets hard and needs to have a breakup. Like, I ghost. Like, it's not where I show up strong, and I'm working on that, and I'm sad about it, and it's just the reality. But like these larger, you know, breaking up with empire, with breaking up with school, breaking up with all these ideas and systems, and my family, of origin, like, did it. So it's always in motion, right? It's so big.
Well, it's interesting to think about, like, when you trust your intuition, right? And I mean, there's a couple different things that you're talking about. Like, one is like the intuition, which you feel it in your body that something's not working right, or that it's not the right fit. And that's something else I want to get to too, is like how when things are the right fit in terms of like doing projects together. But, you know, in relationships, say a romantic relationship, I think often people get stuck on trusting their intuition, or actually probably for friendship too. Like, this isn't going right, something's wrong, but I can't end it, right? Because that's like dangerous. This goes back maybe to the abandonment too. Like, we like carry things on with us for so long, even when they're past their point, because we don't want to lose what we think we have. And maybe it's a little bit easier in group to sort of trust your gut, because it's depending on your status within it. Like, you don't feel like maybe like everything will fall apart. But then there's also this other thing that you were talking about, is when your body like literally makes you. And for me, like, yeah, from like chronic illness experience, I get pushed into this place of being like, my body is telling me no, that because I won't listen to it until it literally forces me to be like, you have to stop doing stuff, because yeah, I'm ready to go hard forever thinking that's what I have to do. So how do we listen to our intuitions and not feel like the world is all hanging on us? I mean, that goes back to the crisis thing I've noticed since COVID. I mean, yeah, we're always in a crisis, because capitalism functions through crises, and the state functions through creating the possibility of upping its violence for security purposes. Since the pandemic started, I feel like I've just been living off crisis energy, and it's like literally killing me. And I mean, there's a lot of evidence to prove that is true to a certain extent. Like, things have just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse, and Gaza is only the most recent iteration, and maybe the most terrible, or spectacularly terrible. But I'm trying to find in myself, in my relation to the things that are happening, a space, like a breath, before I go into that place, because I can't function actually well if I'm feeling an emergency, right? Like, if you start freaking out, then it's hard to act. Yeah, do you have thoughts on like how to separate, or like how to get into that space where we can like attend to the crisis rather than be overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Having chronic illness really brings it to the fore for us, I think. Like, I think disabled people in general, like, and sick people, and have a way to maybe access this in a different way than an able-bodied person, or somebody who doesn't have any illnesses, like chronic ones or acute. And It's that, like, this is gonna sound so corny, but I'm just gonna say it. But it's really about getting like hyper present with what is. I think about all the, like, whether it's like the actual Buddha and all the way up the line and their messages of like presence. And it's because, like, I'm not like in Sudan right now. I'm not in Gaza. That's not actually happening to my body. And I know that I will show up with, like, we have a becoming more together when we get present with what is, and like allow the dance party to happen in your house spontaneously or whatever, or cook food for your friends, or like enjoy the peace that maybe you have in your orbit, because it actually enlivens me and gives me more internal power to do more and be more and show up more. It's the only thing that has ever worked for me. When I get, like, 8 months in bed sick, it's because I didn't do that for months before. I was in that emergency mindset of like, I have to be everywhere all the time. I have to show up for everything. Like, if there's an interesting, you said earlier about individualism, I think it's connected. And I throw myself under the bus with this. Like, I don't have to have an opinion about every issue. Like, I don't need to be an expert on every issue. I don't need to speak on every issue, because that's exhausting. Like, that's hard on our systems. And when we already are depleted and have a low running capacity due to autoimmune illnesses or what have you, that's just going to get eaten away, right? And so I've also, another strategy for me is I'm not on social media. And guess what? I somehow still can pay attention to what's happening in the world and still have, in fact, when we talk about Gaza, I have like literally connections with people in Gaza in a way that I probably wouldn't get to if I was caught up in the whirlwind of the hot takes and being upset. Like, I'm watching my Uilliam, my youngest, who is on Twitter, every day has to process the online stuff around Gaza. And I'm happy to hold that space because they're 19 years old and it's big. I told them, I'm like, this is going to be the thing that happened in the world that actually radicalized you. Like, I see it happening and unfolding in front of my eyes.
Right.
So I'm not like anti that engagement. It just doesn't work for me. It's like another layer of depletion. And so just being awareness and presence with what is seems easy.
Yeah.
Because that's when you actually can listen, and then you hear the intuition. It all comes back to this. And then you know when to stop things or to do things. Yeah.
Make it quiet. I mean, there's like
slow down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which, like, the sort of online stuff and like texting operates at this intense speed that doesn't allow for thought. So like, I'm going back to this thing that you said about when a crisis hits, emergency rather than crisis, an emergency hits, and people are like there in person. We do things, we know what to do, we work together. But like, when you remove that a step to like organizing through signal loops or whatever kind of Twitter, social media activism people think they're doing, we get to, I don't know, people react in these ways that are like, just like, what? Either people feel personally singled out or they feel like they can talk in a cruel way. I mean, I've seen these impulses in myself too, so I'm not like criticizing. And I have this negative text bias. So when every text I read, I feel like someone's upset with me, which says a lot about myself. But yeah, that seems to be a huge thing. And I don't mean, I wonder to what extent, because like this is a moment, I think, that it is radicalizing more and more people because it's so blatant. I mean, everything's getting more and more blatant how terrible it is and how little can be done through the avenues that have been told are the correct ones, whether it's through Stop Cop City stuff, Gaza, the pandemic, the George Floyd uprisings, the just difficulty to live. It's becoming, yeah, more and more people are getting involved, but like that involvement has come through online interactions. So I wonder to what extent this like comes into our in-person spaces. But I mean, it does seem a lot easier to have conflict in person than to like resolve conflict or go through conflict in the kind of depersonalized space of online. So I'll turn this to the question that the other part that I was picking up on what you were saying, that I wanted to kind of pull some threads together, because another thing, and maybe these are connected. Another thing that I'm thinking about, both the thing that we need something that's like regenerative when we're doing this kind of work, and we focus on the thing that feels like it's productive, which could be, protest oriented or whatever, and then we take our attention away from whatever it is that sustains us. But also the thing that you were saying earlier about the fear of abandonment that is like an undercurrent for reasons why we do things. This is making me think about something that I've been trying to articulate and having a hard time doing it without sounding dismissive. I feel like, but like we go into lots of situations thinking this is why we're there, but actually the thing that's happening is something else, like a secondary effect that isn't necessarily even named. So like protest, we know the politicians don't give a shit what we think, and they're not going to listen to us no matter how many millions of us there are in the street, like peacefully protesting or whatever, or semi peacefully protesting. But we do it, and it's not stupid to do it. People do it for other reasons that we don't talk about, but then I think get caught up in the purported reason, like we need to do this because this is going to end it, and the war in Gaza, without like, I don't know, putting our attention to what we're actually achieving out of that. And I think that's just true for like the ways that we connect in these sort of organizing grassroots spaces, that we get mixed up often in the work and then the pleasure, and we seek maybe both in the spaces but aren't clear or explicit about how those two relate, or when it's time for what. So do you have thoughts on just like how we can like name these sort of silent needs to ourselves, be more explicit about it, or pull these threads apart? I mean, do we need to pull them apart, or do we need to like separate things? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of just kind of is flowing. The threads are composting, or it's composting into like my favorite area, which is why multi-generational organizing has to happen. Because if there's a multi-generational, like truly multi-generational, not the one kid who's the kid of the anarchist family, not like, right. Or like, I had someone say our organizing collective is multi-generational. We have like one 18-year-old and we have a couple people in their 50s. I'm like, well, wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
But yeah, I think it really disrupts a lot of the stuff that you're pointing out. And like obviously, like I brought my kids to all the protests and demos and what have you over the years. We worked always really hard to make them, like when you do things multi-generational, like bring your instruments, wear a costume. Like when Uli was like 4 years old, he went to an anti-Olympics one and he had on a cape and boxing gloves, and he was like fighting against and it's just like to try. There's a way that that's how joy really does erupt, when there's like a 4-year-old who's like really grounds us down to what's actually we're doing. And I think we can get just so in our heads and cerebral. Like my friend in Japan was telling me when they were 5, they found out that people are in prisons and they wouldn't let it go. They went to every organizing thing that their parent was involved in, and they'd walk in and go, but people are in prisons. Like, we can't, who cares about the tree down the street? Like, people are in prison. Like, and that's what kids instinctively do. Right. If you really, truly include them. The things that we kind of like compartmentalize because we have to, because it's so freaking overwhelming. They're just like a dog with a bone.
Yeah.
And then I asked her, I'm like, what did you do when you found out animals were in cages? She goes, well, then I was really upset because I really liked animals.
Yeah.
It was really sweet, but also really powerful story for me to remember why multi-generational is really important. And including, how I said earlier, I don't like the statement that's already been done, and elders are so great to have because they can remember the long view. Like they have the moments where we've been at this level of crises before. And, where like dystopias are always happening. They're up for different people in different places around the world, right? Like there's a saying right now, people are saying like it's not too late. Well, it is in some places for some people in some groups, some communities, right? My answer to it is multi-generational organizing.
That seems really helpful. Just with this current moment, I keep going to be like, oh well, like the anti-war movement of 20 years ago is like coming to my head, and I feel this frustration of feeling like the same things will be done. I mean, this has been more, I guess, militant because I think also people's like skills have been honed through George Floyd and the other uprisings over the last decade that weren't really happening. I mean, people had come off the WTO 99, I guess, for the anti-war, but it was like really overwhelmingly kind of liberal feeling in those spaces. And this is not, doesn't have that same feeling. But yeah, I think I've noticed like maybe also like this intergenerational conflict between people around my age in their 40s and like people in their 20s, which is partially this thing about like when you're young, you like you said, like a dog with, did you say that? Like with a dog with a bone? No, you go at it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then when you're older, you're like, well, like maybe there's some other things. Not that like, because I always like associate innovation with younger people, but like the older people maybe like maybe there's other things we can do. But then there's this other aspect of it that we've also been touching on, which is like aging, like aging in these spaces where your responsibilities change, or like what care you need or what care you're responsible for giving to other people. Also, like the work like derails so many of us. Because when I'm in admiration of the like how much I see younger people do, I'm like, what do they don't have jobs and illness or like kids to take care of or like our other family members to take care of or whatever, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. It's like I was happy to hear you say that, just because I'm maybe in my denial of my illness, I'm also like denying that I'm like in this age where I'm like to have other like my life is different, my contributions maybe have to be different than they were. But I still, yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I just always keep coming back to how our spaces still are so segregated in terms of age on both ends of like young and old. And I don't see, I don't know why I feel like that I have this blank. I'm always like, we need to do something about this. And then I'm like, I don't know. We just like fall into the crisis mode, I guess. And like, it's just the same thing, segregated by age. This is for adults.
Yeah, I mean, we actually can't organize like we do right now. Like it just isn't going to work. I mean, I know as someone who's pushing my age and is working class and doesn't have equity and wealth and stuff. So I'm constantly using my imagination on how to have the good life around having enough money to house and feed myself and my family. But I don't have, like, I don't think my role is to be everywhere all the time, and it hasn't been for a while. But there's ways in which I can create spaces as an invitation to think about things differently or to bring people together. And art is always like the thing that orbits for me, because like, kind of doing social experiences. So I don't know when this is going to come out and I don't know when this has happened, but I'm currently collaborating with another family actually to create, it's called Sphere Arts, and it's a multi-generational art space, gallery and art space of co-learning. And it is for multi-generational, because I'm working on a book right now about multi-generational organizing. And the thing that happens to me is I can't write about something I'm not experiencing. It's really hard for me. Even though I've done multicultural, multi-generational and intergenerational organizing and creation stuff, especially because of being part of youth liberation and youth autonomy movements, I'm not right now. So I'm like, all that to say, like, I think Leanne Simpson said that when we interviewed her for Joyful Militancy. She's like, my kids aren't going to sit through a meeting. Like, we have to just completely change how we come. If we're going to include kids and children, youth, elders in our organizing, yeah, we just might have to throw most of it out, start over.
Yeah, rather than expect to have a kid like forcefully adapt into our spaces. It's like I remember I was at a book fair and there was a talk, and this kid was like wandering around, going up on the stage while the people were talking, and which like most people in the audience were fine about. Like the person talking didn't freak out, but then someone in the audience like stood up and freaked out at the parent who then like gathered her kid and ran out crying.
Oh.
But and like no, and then everyone just sort of went on. And yeah, this is something that I experienced. I was in this space with my partner who's like that moment was like super traumatic for them to as someone who's like has felt unwelcome because of having a kid, or no space to have that happen. But then there's this other thing that I see, like, I don't know, there's the romanticization of a kind of like militant struggle, which I have mixed feelings about. And I wonder what you think. Like, is the sign of like the success of our struggle that the cops are like beating us down? And is that when we know that we're really disrupting things? Because it seems like this repression comes because they're scared, but then the space becomes dangerous for people, right? And I also don't want to feed us to the wolves, right? Or like have us all be caught up in that. But I think so much or of the orientation goes to this like direct confrontation with the state and pulling down this violence on us as a sign of what we're doing. Also, I guess maybe it has to do with watching this inordinate violence happening and feeling relatively safe where we're at and like, you know, in Turtle Island. So I don't know, like, how do we counteract that kind of that push towards a certain kind of militancy that like fetishizes violence? And I think this is maybe one of the major things on the table now. Like, how do we end these cycles of violence? Because like, it seems that that's what we're witnessing is vengeance, you know, misplaced vengeance.
Yeah. It's, you know, for me, like, I mean, militancy to me just means like an unwavering resolve for something. Usually for. I tend to move away from against and for. But it's interesting that, like, you know, Vancouver, where I live on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, occupied stolen lands, because it's warmer here. It's similar to Seattle. You know, a lot of people who are more street involved or unhoused, dependent on different types of drugs or whatnot. And, you know, those types of margins of lifestyles are not up from choice. Some of them are, some aren't. End up here. We have a large population. And to me, it's like, it's amazing how, you know, like a lot of the activism and organizing is looking outward when like, that's an incredible amount of violence. Like there's like a blocks and blocks and blocks in the summer where the sidewalks were all tents. And then the fentanyl deaths on top of it and the violence that's happening in a lot of those tents. You can just even imagine. And the layers of violence that's happening from the state to these folks. And there's so many amazing organizations and individuals who are out there. There's tent cities everywhere. Like it's, you know, encampments and stuff. But like coming back to that idea of like, I can't be everywhere all the time. Like I remember when I first started working with young people directly, like, and, you know, I started it because my kid needed it. And then we just sort of did it. But I started noticing more and more kids who were unhoused and on the streets around because of where the thistle was. And like, I literally had to tell myself, I can't, like that idea, you know how environmentalists say, I'm going to save the earth, which is just a bonkers statement in my head. But it's kind of like, a trend for a youth worker to say, I'm going to save all kids. First of all, if you're coming at it from saving, you might want to rethink that, but like I literally couldn't. Like I'm one person and a person who has low wealth and low health. So it's like, oh my gosh. So the only thing that for me, like with my militancy, kind of coming back to breaking up with people or organizations, is that I do have some lines that are like, I call them in the concrete, like they're not even in the sand. Like, and it's like people who are shitty to young people, get the fuck away from me. Like I used to have nuance around, you know, definitely was like probably cis women I was thinking at the time, like feminisms around single parenting. And I would often like conflate that. And over time, I've slowly been like, you know what, feminism threw kids under the bus in most of their movements. Like, fuck y'all. Like, I'm just like, so I do have, you know, that to me is a form of my militancy that comes up. Mm-hmm. And some people might think that's violent, but yeah, I think like the US, not that Canada is hilarious compared to the US when it comes to protests and stuff and cops, but it does, you know, I'm a white settler. I look like a nice elderly middle-aged woman. Like I'm gonna, you know, I'm not going to be targeted by them. So, and I know like intense violence happens here, similar to the US, like our prisons are filled with particularly Indigenous men, you know, so there's like layers and layers of violence and people are out fighting all those front lines, especially land stuff here. Like the violence against Indigenous folks protecting their land is immense. What was your question? Like, should we keep doing that? Or what is that?
No, I mean, I guess I was asking one of the limits potentially that people might bring up in terms of like, in terms of intergenerational organizing, including youth, and is the exposure to violence and a sort of orientation of our movements towards that confrontation with the state that brings violence.
Right. Okay. So this is where like collectivism, that puritanism's got to get also thrown out, right? So like horizontality or, you know, like incorporating some kind of verticalism or some kind of like, or nodes or whatever you want to, pods, whatever language, there's always new language for how people should come together and organize. The Zapatistas would maybe come to mind a little bit, although they still deal with some, empire type axes of oppression for sure. But I think like if we were organizing multi-generational in different ways, like, yeah, first of all, I'm really a proponent of autonomy, right? So never forcing anybody to do anything like that, like in terms, especially a kid. Like, but yeah, I think that they have like their right size of where they're at and develop, in their body size, and like it's dangerous for them to be on the front lines of an armed struggle or a direct action like in that way where cops are coming in. But that's why we have to think through how we throw it all out, start over again. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a big movement person. I'm more, I guess you'd call it prefigurative politics. I'm more into like the many politics, the many nows, the many ways we can come together, and different groups can do different things. And I think that's will get us further. It's not working to do the big movement against the big massive state. So
yeah, I mean, for sure this moment for me is like bringing up again the question of why we keep thinking massive politics are the answer, because it's really interesting, important to see that there's a massive group of people who are saying no, and especially Palestinians have said that is like really heartening, but it's not getting us closer to things. And then yeah, with the way that repression's coming down, yeah, like I don't know, like that kind of politics I think is more visible and more traceable and more, they can network us in ways. So like that direct confrontation seems also, I don't know, we do these things over and over again. So with the question about like being here too, like, I mean, one of the things with this current moment with the struggle of watching, settler genocidal violence in Gaza could turn us to that here in the US and Canada, which are settler states. And I think like the unhoused population is connected to that sort of struggle too, because it's like the settler colonial relationship to land as property and like a kind of material possession that creates both the like displacement and killing of indigenous people, and the fact that not everyone wouldn't necessarily have shelter in this land, or people can't live off the land freely, whatever that means for them, whether that's housed or unhoused. So these struggles are like kind of eclipsed in this moment, which makes sense, but they're like when we talk about like the sort of responsibility that we have to Palestinians, that our struggles are interconnected, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be, that what we can do is stop the genocide. It might be that we also work towards the ending of settler colonialism here, which I guess maybe just seems so fucking impossible that like hard to know where to start. I mean, except for that indigenous groups are doing stuff all the time in specific places. But like, yeah, I would be interested to see more of the like Gaza rallies and stuff connecting with indigenous groups wherever they're at to kind of link those struggles. And I'm not obviously unique in saying this, like people have been talking about this for sure. But yeah, so like thinking about what it means to be here and how we connect to it. I mean, this is also, as I'll put this into a question, this is a thing that comes up for Jewish people in this moment. I'm Jewish and like anti-Zionist Jew, and sort of thinking about a role within diaspora rather than wanting this homeland. And there's the sort of this Yiddish concept of Doigkeit, this like here-ness. And I try to think about that in a way that connects with some of the things that you're saying. And going back to the very beginning of our conversation with like the ways that you kind of facilitate groups, something I see as a strength within anarchist approaches to doing things is creating spaces that host people and like welcome them in, and that in that space something can happen. And I wonder if you have thoughts on just this kind of like this idea of like hosting or facilitating as a kind of anarchist practice, because it seems like that's part of your approach to things too.
Yeah, I think about it a lot. I really think about that word hospitality, like the true meaning of it, that's like beyond tolerance, where it's like a true welcoming in of difference.
Yeah.
And we did a couple things. We called them the Social Spaces Summit, where we invited folks from all over, but mostly folks came from the States, to be honest, who were running social spaces for, us organizers to come together and like kind of, offer sessions and have conversations about everything we're talking about now. And we did two, one in 2012 and one in 2013. And before it started, I had said to the group that I was organizing it with, I said, there's a couple of things we can't do up front because we'll all fall into our patterns and mimic empire, and we won't do the thing we're hoping to do. And the first thing was we didn't do the round. The tyranny of the round privileges extroverts, people who have a certain kind of cognitive privilege, and it also sets up a hierarchy accidentally. We tend to wear our badges. You know who should only wear badges is cops, right?
What's the round?
Where we sit in a circle awkwardly and we go around introducing ourselves.
Oh, okay.
So I said, I think that can happen in smaller sessions. People can do whatever they need to do to create the intimate space they need. But in terms of like the space itself of this invite to, I can't remember how many people came in the end, like maybe 70. We're going to have dinner together. We're going to do a decolonial diet. We're going to invite in the Squamish cook and da-da-da-da. I'm going to bring in my friend Kari, who's like plays the ukulele and knows how to get a group singing together. And we're just going to be together. We're going to eat, we're going to dance, we're going to talk, we're going to play music. And it set the tone. And I think actually Cindy actually wrote about their experience at the summit because it was so different. And that's actually where I met Cleve Benelli. He came up and talked about his project and talked about the concept of, and really also that's where we made a connection because he saw that kind of creating the fertile ground for mutuality to grow and to disrupt hierarchy. Like it just did. It just withered away and let people meet each other who want to meet each other and that kind of autonomy in practice. And so a lot of people think I just do things and it's loosey-goosey, but there's a lot of care and thought put into really looking at where patterns get locked. And it's these reflexive ways of we think are the ways is the right way or the radical way of organizing. And, people used to ask the thistle, like, do you teach the thistlers how to do consensus and stuff? And I'm like, no, because something happens to us when we're truly invited into a space and given the trust and the care to be part of it. Like people just show up well, right? And I actively do that. I actively try to disrupt things that replicate school or ways that are inherently flawed for the group. Like it privileges all those models tend to privilege certain types of people and deprivilege a whole pile of others who, if they have anxiety disorders, whatever. I could never, it took me until I was like in my 40s to even speak in a round because I have a speech impediment. I'm have social anxiety, like severely. And so I would just shake. And so then no one would get to know the real me if they met me in that environment.
So I think that's super helpful just to think about. Again, one of the ways that I'm trying to understand breaking up is not external breakups, but these internal breakups with like the structures and logics that we embody of power and hierarchy and empire. And I guess like I hadn't even thought specifically about like some people think about going in a circle as empowering to people. I've used it in classroom spaces to have it so that discussion is like where people can pass, but like discussion is predictable and doesn't only favor the people who feel comfortable to speak out, but you're allowed to not say anything too. And
circles are important. I'm pro circle, especially in the like. I love to hear that. It's the tyranny of the circle where you have to go next.
Right.
Yeah.
And also demanding an introduction in a specific way in a specific setting. I mean, I like have found myself doing that in classroom spaces mostly because it's like sort of expected. But I'm always like, why am I like, I don't think that this is doing anything and it feels perfunctory. And like my excuse is to try to get people's voices in there because I don't want to dominate as the professor. But then I still end up doing it because everyone's nervous. It's the first day of class or, and then no one's, anyway, I hadn't thought about that like deeply rather than to say like I don't know why I'm doing this thing that I'm trying to keep doing.
Well, I think it's like I'm gonna bring out the anarchist thing, which you're so good at like tuning into and like being at the forefront of like anarchist practices in motion. Is like anarchists started that year, like right? Like the first anarchist thing I went to a long time ago, like 25 years ago, 3 years ago, before Seattle, like they were that kind of like, you know, we said Coast Salish lands back then. We didn't break it down. But like anarchists were doing that work. They were doing that decolonial work. They were thinking about it, right? And even some of the gender stuff was even there. Or like, you know, this is my name, but you can call me this or whatever. And, you know, now it's been completely co-opted. Now you, as a professor, would probably get canceled if you didn't do that, like, or someone would write up on you, because now it's become like it's a bar. If you don't do that, you've failed at everything.
It's institutionalized.
It's completely, it's past the 15-year mark.
Yeah.
And so we're I think all of us, and I include, like, we have some mutual friends who are thinking through this and feeling through this. I would say we're feeling through it, of how, what are we, you know, because I've been thinking a lot about, like, we're really good at responding and going, oh no, we don't like that, and oh, we should do this, but patterns, whoa, right? Patterning, like it's the thing that keeps us locked in empire's grip, right?
Yeah.
So who knows? I'm excited to see what it is. I do social experiments like I did at the summit. It went off really well. Maybe one or two people were really upset they didn't get to wear the badge, but like they got to tell everybody in the room eventually who they were and all the things they did.
Yeah.
You know, and that's fine. I that also gets really seeded and trained in us really young to show our resume as we walk in everywhere. So right. I don't have judgment. I just try to disrupt it when we're trying to come together in a way that's decomposing empire and composing new worlds. When I want to, those little tiny ways that need to be disrupted.
It's time for a break. Welcome back to our conversation. You know, I've been thinking about this a little bit again, and because I've been doing writing around what I've been seeing and experiencing in the organizing in relation to Gaza. And since the lead was taken in the protest movement through massive civil disobedience led by nonprofits, which I think did an important thing, and maybe is still doing an important thing, especially anti-Zionist Jews speaking out. But that nonprofit head is now, I feel so ensconced in a lot of these spaces that are doing things even not through the nonprofit. And it's funny to see these chains, because you said, the anarchists innovated it. When I've seen how some of these nonprofits are working, I'm like, oh, they took this from anarchist organizing, but now it's really weird and and all wrong, and I don't know, and then it comes back with a hierarchy in play that doesn't feel right, and then it's basically scripted at this point, so I'm going into this negation mode where I'm this isn't, we can't be doing this. This is this isn't the thing. And yet I also know the impulse that with the pattern you said, the way I've been talking about it is kind of grammar and syntax and a vocabulary that we go into this one language, which is protest, which we know isn't meaning the things we want, and yet it's the only thing we speak. We just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Yeah, I'm just been trying to be kind of beating my head against the wall of this and trying to figure out why I feel this approach, even within certain forms of anarchism, is so circumscribed and stuck. Klee actually, I mean, it's really, I've been grappling with No Spiritual Surrender, the book that he published right before he died. And I mean, he's really good at talking about the sort of also the insufficiencies of anarchism, specifically from an indigenous point of view, because it's still stuck within that paradigm, the Enlightenment paradigm, that can't really grapple with what the relationship to land would be outside of ownership or extraction or just like materialism, just like not spiritual.
Yeah, no, totally. I really just put a plug for his On Belonging too, against settler belonging, because it actually speaks to everything we're talking about. In Klee's style, it starts off very in negation, but it does end with affirmation, in that like you are invited in to belong if you engage in mutuality, no matter what your background is. And like he and I really connected because I'm very against, I call it haunted pedagogies and institutional, like Western thought, basically European Western thought. I see it everywhere, the tentacles everywhere. There's a new book out right now called The Empire of Neurotypicalism or something, or no, it's really looks fantastic because it really tracks the rays of capitalism. It's probably too Marxist for me, but it looks at all these things we're talking about, how, you know, eugenics, everything set up the idea of the neurotypical brain, why we're having this surge right now of neurodiversity. I just flipped over to that from Klee's thing, but it's all connected. And, you know, we're severed. We don't need to school everybody about this, but like, yeah, you know, our relationship with nature is an enlightenment idea, right? And it's that violence is why we're all sick, like all of it. I always think about, is it Rachel Carson? She wrote Silent Spring in the 50s. Yeah.
I know the book.
Yeah. Like if humans continue to be violent to nature, nature's going to strike back hard. And like, this includes COVID. Right. This includes all of it. Like we're so out of balance. So that gets to like, you know, I just can't believe that was written so long ago, right? I mean, predates Bookchin even on this conversation of being disconnected.
But it's another instance of a settler having to like discover a thing that indigenous people have been saying for
absolutely. It's like, I can't hear the birds. What's going on?
Yeah. Which I think is like sort of like Klee's message is to anarchists, like white or settler anarchists who want to engage in work alongside indigenous liberation movements to not know. I mean, he sort of invokes the unknowable as a way of escaping. And I think that's often a problem in the spaces when people are trying to like, or action oriented and maybe this like emergency planning oriented, is like they want to know that what they're doing is worthwhile. They want to know that it'll get a result. And that, yeah, I think that really traps us in this repeating the same lines over and over again, or running our heads against the same wall over and over again.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we brought up the, you know, neuroatypical point and connecting that back to the sort of failure of the going out in the round for different ways that different brains work. My first reaction was like, well, I'm like stuck in my brain and that creates blind spots for me alongside like the weight of normativity. But then I've been very excited about the sort of this discourse around it that to me is also connected to like youth and like youth development, and also connected to transness, because there's been sort of studies that show that neurodiversity and transness often go hand in hand in ways. And I guess it gets me a little bit hopeful, because that going out of this like negation thing, that like the youth can't even live up to the expectations of this empire, that they're and actively like kind of leaning into the refusal to do it, to perform the roles that's expected of them. So if you have more to say on that, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like thinking back, like the first public thing I ever did was 23 years ago. Like I did a big, huge lecture on, I called it Silencing Boyhood. And I explained that I meant all genders. I was pretty proud of myself because I was 22. I was like, people who are socialized and have been like the psychology of teachers have been told that is a boy behavior, fidgeting, And so like the rise of misdiagnosis and drugging kids that was happening rapidly in the 90s with like intense coke like drugs, you know. And so I was I call it my weird knowings, because I really another thing Klee and I connected on is I really embrace the idea of not knowing and just trying to search constantly for better questions that empire hides from us, or colonialism has destroyed or tried to. But I've always felt like, and it starts with my own experience and why I unschooled my kids, is like, I was like, they're neurotypically is a facade. Like there's no such thing. Right. And there's people who are for a whole pile of reasons, fit into that narrow box that school has done, whether they're masking or they have that is their brain. That's how they work. I think some people do. I don't think it's nobody. And so I just constantly fought against that. And my oldest he went to school for 3 years, and they were trying, a couple teachers wanted him to get diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, oh, you just met your match. I've done all my research.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know, like, he's autistic, and absolutely, but because he's been raised in a certain way or whatever, however, why, I don't know why, he's very singular and like very confident, and but he's autistic, and I see how hard the world has been against him for the last 30 years. But if I hadn't have had that awareness and he had gotten drugged, like, I don't know if you know about this, but like that drug for ADHD for people with autism is really disaster. It's a disaster. And I think like back then, autism was seen as not a spectrum. It was very specific, nonverbal, all the things. So I'm really like, it's like every movement, you look at the young people and you see them reaping off of the movement and you think it's them driving it entirely. But there's always this huge generation that kind of broke through. I mean, this is thinking of trying stuff and that, right? Like it's in motion. I get inspired and radicalized by young people all the time. And I also really try not to erase all the work that was invisible that happened for decades ahead of time. And that is what happened on the narrow, because I was really plugged into the neurodiversity, because unschooling world is like, it just is, right? Like a lot of those families end up in that environment at alternative to educations, alternative to schools, because their kids have been drugged or misdiagnosed in lots of cases, or like diagnosed with a lot of judgment and a lot of fear, or institutionalized in a way that wasn't for their thriving. And so they retreat and they leave that behind, and they come to this world that I was just in my orbit. So there's been like decades of that thought, of that work and that research that's really opened it up for young people to have access to it. And I think that that's really important piece that doesn't always get talked about, including madness and all that stuff as well, like insanism and
I think that's really important to talk about, like that invisibilization, which I think can show up in the way that older people, that like, that feeling that older people express when it's like the young people think I don't know, it's like too easy for them or something, because they get to be like, they get to have the things that we fought for, basically, and then aren't doing the same struggle. Because I see that with trans stuff too, like intergenerationally with trans, and not always, but just like people are like, it's different or easier, or they're doing it differently, so that's like wrong. I have the same impulse, like, because I like functioned through school well. I'm like this weird, the way that my brain works is like theoretically oriented and whatever, and then when I'm teaching students and I'm like stuck within my own mindset, I'm like, why can't they do the thing that I know how to do or whatever, you know what I mean? So I don't know, we have to like, even the people who are like working for this kind of stuff can get stuck in that. So I think it's really important to connect it historically, that it's not just like this new phenomenon where kids are breaking with this thing, but that's the way that we see the kind of long-term work that we're doing show up in the way that
absolutely. And it's important because it's all part of it. Like before it was hidden or on the margins, or only a few people had access to it. And there's like an eruption right now, which is amazing, because people, well, it's not amazing. It's really hard to live with autism. Like the world is really hard.
Yeah.
Like I don't mean that. I just mean like, because society hasn't really caught up at all. Like, and it won't. It will keep trying to. I predict there'll actually be some terrible pushbacks. But I think it's, it's interesting that you bring up like that. Like speech is another thing. Like I spent a lot of time thinking about youth and youth oppression, and it's one of the things that really oppresses youth is along the lines of speech and ability to articulate their ideas and thinking in the world. And I've had a few scholar friends who do this as their thing. This is their research. And I was like, is there any Western philosophers who don't privilege speech as a way of being intelligent, having reason? And they're like, only one, Peter Kropotkin.
Oh, really?
But of course.
Yeah.
Right? Because
that's so interesting.
Yeah. And, and I have a hard, remember that I said that I have the line in the concrete. Yeah. This is one of my, I will almost throw out a whole philosopher if they have a harsh position on speech equals an ability to speak well is equals like Hannah Ardent. She says it that clearly.
Yeah.
To be reasonable, like fuck her forever. like, like,
yeah.
Like it's damaging. It holds adult supremacy in place. And that's really strong. And people who have other neural differences around speech or like I have a language processing disability. Like it's really hard for me to write. And I, like, so does that mean I can't think? I'm not intelligent. I don't have a reasonable thought. Clearly not.
Right.
My work speaks for itself. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, that sort of like deconstructive philosophy too is like that, to looking at how speech has been privileged over all the other forms of, as the kind of pure presence, but also that rational knowing, which really makes us think in specific ways, actually, and then totally cuts out these other things that can't be seen as possible. I mean, that, I think like that is also the thing about schooling, right? Because it's training you to do it in a specific way that is the right way, that then you can no longer even see the other ways are valid. It really trains your eyes that way. I was thinking about like kind of going back to this breaking up question and the relationship to joy, because that's something that you've centered a lot in your work. I mean, talking about also, like the work that you've done that shows your contributions to this long struggle, joyful militancy. But I'm wondering about how you would connect breaking up and joy in relation to the work that we do in this world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just for people listening who don't know anything about joyful militancy, like joy is not happiness. Joy is a part of a whole web of emotions. It's not just an emotion. It's affect, and it's in our bodies, and it has a life of its own. I always say that joy has sharp edges, and so it can be transformative. And within that constitution, there's joy, grief. So it's so connected to transformation of movement and becoming more. It's like it increases our power. That's just a really quick definition of how we define joy in the book and how I see joy. And I'm not alone. I mean, it goes way back. So, and we work off of theorists on that. So with that in mind, that kind of connecting to intuition, or I actually, like, I think trust is probably bigger for me than joy. And only in that, when I feel that feeling of joy, feeling suppressed or unable to access it, and maybe despair is bigger, then I go in and listen, and I trust what I hear. And often it's like, get the fuck out. Like, might just be out of that one house, that one community, whatever. Like, it's just, so they are so connected for me. When I used to say that joy is, really, I actually have to give Ursula K. Le Guin a shout out, because in The Dispossessed, she actually defines joy this way. Like, I think he even says at one point, like, no, I don't mean happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Like, it's pleasure. It's like pleasure. It comes and goes. It sparks. It comes. But joy is the goal, right? Like, it's like it's this thing that you have no control over. It just rises up. And of course, she understood what joy was. Right. So yeah, if it's feeling like, so I used to say, like, I feel like in my family, just before I split up with my family, here's the example, is I said, I feel like to my partner, I have a belly full of joy, and it won't leave there. Because I'm in these relationships that are squashing literally squashing my joy. They're totally connected. And so I've often joked about writing a book called The Joy of Quitting. We had at the Thistle, we made patches and spray paint and stuff, whatever. It was so years ago, but that said, don't give up, quit. And we put it all over the high schools all around town, Right. So it's like quitting sometimes is the best way to access joy, or breaking up, to use your language. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking that in the beginning of our conversation. I mean, like in Freud's thing, I'm talking about mourning. He like looks into the phenomenon of like people having like being sexually aroused around grief, and like how those two things seem to be like disconnected. But when I have this like feeling of joy in my body as a possibility, it's usually connected to relieving myself from something that I feel bound to. And it's funny because, like, again, like quitting, right? Like, we get so stuck in this work mentality, because I was like, in this work that we do in my question. But as a person who doesn't want to frame world around work, like I don't know why I would say that we need to be quitting things all the time. I've been thinking also just because of I don't know, you talked about despair, and like despair as a way that you feel when when you're in a space, but the despair of the terror of the world. And I've been digging into my nihilism, but nihilism gets a bad rap, I think, and is related around this idea of jouissance too. Like often that's what people, queer nihilists often talk about, that coming from like Lacan, which isn't, again, it's the way that you're defining joy. It's something beyond pleasure that includes pain, and it's often used as a way of thinking about like the painful kind of breaking out of the trappings of this world, which couldn't even involve death, right? And risks. Everything sort of is arranged so that we can't access those things because they're so dangerous to the status quo, even to this minor thing of being like, I can't end this relationship because I'm stuck here. And you knew in your belly that you had that joy, like, but it's, and you, I mean, thankfully gave yourself permission to do the thing you needed to do. But it's, yeah, we're so stuck often to not even experience the possibility of that joy. I always feel like it's over there. It's just over there if I can get to it, but I don't know how to get there,
Yeah. I mean, speaking more openly about the fact that we're often to really pay attention to what we're called to do and work on, because it's often a place of struggle for ourselves. So like actually accessing joy is not always easy for me. Despair is way easier. Despair rolls through me like no problem. But I also see despair as powerful, and it has embers burning. It's not sadness. Empire wants us to be sad. I can't remember his name. There's that philosopher he wrote, Omnicide, Jason Mohammed. Like he's really big on like rethinking what nihilism is and what despair is, because I think we're at a point right now. I think that I wrote Joyful Militancy with Nick at a time when affirmation was really important, but I think like we're actually at a point where negations might be needed a bit more, the yin yang maybe a little bit, but I'm with you on this. I feel like I'm tuning into that more. And interestingly enough, joy is running more often when I just before Clee passed away, I had messaged him and said, I think I'm going to write a piece called Kill Hope. And he was really excited. And it's kind of like that idea of killjoy, right? Which I never took offense to from people. I totally knew what they were talking about. And so I feel like we're at this place where, yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what you think about this, because I think as someone who always orients towards affirmation, fighting for what we love, thriving, I'm wondering more about the questions. Maybe the better questions might be over on the other side.
Yeah, that's where my mind is going. And it's funny because I wrote this book, Practical Anarchism, that has this sort of seemingly positive orientation, but a thread running through it for me, because it's like breaking up was part of that, is nihilism and negation, which I don't see as like, the caricature of nihilism is that it's just like pessimism, cynical, and refusal to do anything. But I'm with you on this, because I think what I've been saying about the work that I'm doing now is trying to like help bring people to the point of refusal, because like this world is terrible and we all can see it for what it is. And the only way, like, I'm sort of against this thing of like the only way out is through, because I think once we get through, we get stuck. We need to like totally cut with it in all of these ways. And nihilism in that way is connected to joy, because it's relieving yourself from playing this role. It's like it's not like a commitment to misery or something, which I think is what people misunderstand. And yeah, I mean, obviously, like the things that are coming out in this moment, like Clee passing, but also his book, which is really using nihilism in relationship to Indigenous liberation, which is not like he's showing, he does talk about how it opens up space and creates a possibility for something else. The other book that it's like coming around again, it's not that old, is Blessed is the Flame, about concentration camp resistance and like the reasons why people do that. And it's also like that book talks about how it's the spontaneous moments and eruptions of things that had the most success, not the organized resistance, which is where I'm going in this. So yes, I'm with you on this, and I'm like, this is where all my writing has been now, is on negation and nihilism, because I don't want to be seen as simply thinking it's an easy thing to do, and you just like bring anarchism into your life and everything will be good,
Yeah, that's so exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. And I did get that in your book too, that thread. I'm sure it probably sparked some of this new path for me. I mean, people who know me, they're like, whatever, you don't have much levity. Like you're like, My partner, who we've been together 32 years, like he's my levity. He just makes me laugh every day, thank God. But I'm like, yeah. So it's actually maybe just a coming into truth around, like, I'm fucking pissed off. Like, I'm just so done with, yeah, affirming that things are always, always, always happening good.
Right.
It's like, no.
Right.
It's a yes and. It's a yes and.
Oh, I was just going in my head to like the rage, like that gets called adolescent rage, which it was when I awoke into anarchism was through that rage, which was both with the terribleness of the world, but also the terribleness of like coming into a body that and like trying to figure out this masculinity shit that I didn't want to do. But that calling it adolescent rage is usually dismissing it as unproductive and also connected to these things that are like, impossible or unrealistic. And actually maybe that rage is something we need to harness in a way before it gets trained into the like righteous rage of like activism, which tells us that there's a path that we must take and that we know how to do it. And then just, yeah, it's a retraining of into another kind of correct way of doing things. Okay, so but you brought up trust, right? And which is like I'm like, oh, and then you have the other book, Trust Kids. It's like I'm thinking about joy and trust and how that's come up through our discussion. So I wonder, when do you feel like you can create trust in relationship around this kind of orientation towards the world? Like, how do you, because a lot of this is going back to the cycles of violence and trauma. Like, so many of us have been harmed, and I find that a lot of the ways that like the fear of abandonment causes us to be distrustful of people, whether they're saying what they mean or that they would really show up for us or whatever. So I'm wondering if how you orient towards the capacity for trust.
Oh, that's a great question. It's like it's another anarchist principle kind of at the root of it, which is meeting people where they find themselves. It really is like it, and to bring in, the wonderful word nuance, which liberals have completely weaponized and made me not want to ever use it again. But it's the nuance of that word is really nuanced. So the trust I have with my partner, that's 32 years of growing and depth, right? So I'm very much talking about it in terms of like, I trust that the people who are showing up are doing their best and want to do their best.
Hmm.
Be there and show up. They're here because they care at some point. And so it's worth it to just trust that and work from there, including being with the conflicts and sitting in the fire with, like, if you're wanting to. That's another thing. I also trust when part of leaving, people always want to do the exit process or whatever. Like, I'm like, if it depends. For me, it's like, are we going to continue our relationship post this group that we're dissolving? No, then no. I'm not going to sit in the fire with you. Like, I have such small capacity with my health, and I have like really intense and intentional relationships with my family, with my kids. They're my butt. Like, we create art together, we do shit together. Like, I can't be doing process with people because your ego needs it. Like, it sounds judgy, but I'm just like, I've gotten really clear about trusting myself, because I'm actually a really kind person. I know that in my heart. I want people to thrive. I want people to have a good life. I want people not to suffer. So from when I don't feel trust flowing, it's usually probably not.
That makes so much sense, the way that you're talking about it. And again, to me, it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You were saying that you feel like you ghost on friendships, but I've found in the like friendships that I've ended, they haven't always been this grand exit, right? Because maybe that process would entail too much, right? But also, and this relates to like ending things with family too, like you get stuck in these projections and these stories that maybe are irreconcilable. And to me, anarchism is about allowing things to be irreconcilable, that we don't need to all agree on something. So yeah, I think that really makes sense. And I'm going back to that just to say, like, maybe your ghosting is a good thing and a healthy thing. And then just this, I wanted to say, I think like what happens, I try to take people at their word, because it's too hard to live in the world thinking that everyone's out to get you or to harm you. It's like, for me, it's a lot of work, and it made me exposes me to harm. But like, I also think that like when you get down to it, and maybe this is why I don't always want to process with everyone everything. It's like there's this mismatch of like projections and expectations that aren't being communicated, or like whatever needs trying to be met in ways that are not direct. And so I'd rather sort of just be like, that didn't work out, let it go, than to like work through it. Like, you don't need to be friends with everyone, and you don't need to bring everyone along with you every step of the way. Yeah, I don't know. That's what like, that was helpful to me to hear you say it that way.
I really thank you. You really helped me too. I feel like I just inhaled a whole pile. The joy of the breakup. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly like, I don't know, like it's never, people get stuck in this, and I'm not like, when I talk about breakup, I'm not like, oh, I'm the master of breaking up, I know how to do it right, or I'm really good at ending things, but it's probably true that if you're thinking about breaking up, it's probably not a bad idea to do it, whatever it is, because it doesn't hurt, and you can also find your way back usually if you need to, you know.
Totally. Yeah. So that's where trust comes in. Just trust it. Just do it.
Oh yeah.
Do it.
That's what I have to say with my friends and stuff when they're going through breakups and like holding on, they want to hold on to something. You gotta, and I've had to do this myself, be like, well, if there's like a way back, then this moment of break will help make that possible, not make it impossible. You cling to these things and drain them, till their last drag, which is true for a lot of groups, I think too.
Yeah. It's true. And they I really like the idea of composing and composting, right? Like it's not ending. Like you're taking stuff from it. Like we're not siloed, even though the empire wants us to think we are, and individually atomized over here. Like every relationship is with me in one way, like loss is, that's a whole other worm thought of like loss and grief. But
no, the composting thing is a good visualization for it too, because if we all are these like, patchworks of things, then and experiences, then when we get involved in other things, we're like bringing those pieces, just like whatever the matter of the world gets recycled into other things.
Yeah,
I like that image. I hadn't thought about it before.
And it's part of my praxis of like not erasing my mentors who came before, even if we're not friends anymore. Like I will always say I learned this from so and so, or because they're part of me, for good or for hard. Like it's just part of, especially as a deschooler, deprofessional. Like so much of my learning comes through relationships and in community. Like that is where I learn, and not in institutions. So even more so for me, it feels really, really important to acknowledge.
Yeah, name those and
name names.
I also find like just like, writing and having conversations was a thing that I like doing. And for me is like, isn't about my unique ideas or contributions, but like the position I'm in and the experience that I've had, I like put them together, put a bunch of things that I didn't make up together in a new way to then offer to someone else to do something with,
Yeah.
Like this like
Leavings.
junction point. Well, I wonder if you wanted to talk about any of the projects that you're starting that aren't or that you're not breaking with yet. Just the new
beginnings.
So to like keep people linked up with what you've got on the horizon.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Not a lot of negation. It's been a lot of joy. You can find mostly what I'm doing I have a website, finally, first time ever. Wow. Joyfulcarla.com. Yeah, leave social media, then you need something, right? It's like, oh shoot, right? Because I'm such a collaborator, I had a lot of websites, but they were project websites, like Grounded Futures or the Purple Thistle or whatever. So joyfulcarla.com. I am launching a new show, solo, called Walking with Change. A search for better, lost, and new questions, kind of orbiting everything we talked about here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when that will drop, but that's kind of the thing I'm most excited about.
Well, cool. I look forward to that, and just everyone should follow what Carla does. It's really, I love being able to be in conversation with you and thinking with you and reading and hearing your work.
Yeah, same here. Let's keep in touch. Yeah. We'll walk with change together one day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Remember to go over to forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories or call us at 917-426-6548 if you want to submit a story, ask a question, or share any kind of information that you'd like us to discuss on this podcast. Excited to hear from you all.
Thank you for listening to The Breakup Theory. If you want to stay plugged in or support us, you can go to patreon.com/thebreakuptheory. Also, follow us on your podcasting app and give us a rating if you like. See you next time.